The masculine uses the feminine to soothe fear. The feminine uses the masculine to soothe abandonment. Attraction becomes regulation and chemistry becomes anesthesia. And initiation breaks that loop. So it forces each of the polarities to metabolize their own wounds. Without initiation, polarity is compulsion, and with initiation, polarity is choice. Today, we are going to look into two phenomena, awakening and initiation. First, a little bit of glossary, and then we are going to dedicate today's call to initiation. But I want to put the word and the phenomena of awakening into the picture to have its context for more clarity. So awakening is nothing other than more and more awareness. It comes in layers, it comes again and again, and initiation is more and more embodiment. So this is the whole awakening realm, and how to understand it and how to observe and what to observe to make deeper meaning. And we are awakening in layers, as I said, again and again and again. And the same goes for initiation. So now we go into initiation and embodiment. And who is addressing that? Well, we had cultures, ancient cultures, had initiation rituals, rites of passage for young folks to step into adulthood, to be grown up. And they had, from my research, 5 distinct characteristics, patterns, what actually happened in these rites of passage. They've been very different, but they all created the same thing. And their conditions or their patterns that have been woven into these rites were, for the first one, separation was enforced. So initiates were physically removed from their context, family, especially the mother, and ordinary life, and they were no longer in that safe container. And we don't do that anymore. We no longer create true protected separation phases. So we might do this for ourselves, as one of you mentioned in the check-in, doing this as in stepping out there and exploring the world. It's just not, that's not a protected space. That's basically quite risky. And originally, initiation rites have been safe, although separation was enforced. The second thing is that this liminal ordeal was very well structured. So it was controlled hardship, like fasting, isolation, symbolic death, endurance tests, etc. This is not happening at all anymore. We avoid discomfort, or we encounter it chaotically instead of ritually. The third thing was elders guided the descent. So when you kind of went into yourself to face all these fears that then come up, mature men and women transmitted containment and meaning. So it was basically a live meaning making happening in due course of the whole ordeal. And now we kind of have a lack of intergenerational structures. I'm always saying, where are the elders? Where are the ancestors? Especially if you're in a situation where you don't find anybody around you who's gone through things. There is literally no guidance. And eventually you turn to ChatGPT to figure out how did the other cultures do it. That's what I did, just to find meaning. But it's, of course, then not a beautifully framed and physically embodied meaning making with somebody else. It's a machine, and it's helpful, but it's not enough. And the fourth is identity was publicly transformed. So when the community was witnessing the transition into the new role, and what we do have is we have private growth, but there is no collective acknowledgement of adulthood and of any kind of new identity we come out. It's not just adulthood. So we change identity every time we step into a new stage. And usually that change of identity is marked by people moving places, having a different style, deciding to have a new relationship. So it's like outer things, but it's not necessarily anything that is culturally acknowledged and celebrated. And the fifth, is the return required responsibility. So when initiates re-entered society with duties, not just with insight, they got new duties. And we often now today pursue self-discovery without structural identity and behavioral change. And that means it's not embodied. Because, if you don't have a new identity, no behavioral change happens. And we don't get the new identity fully because there was no collective meaning making. We don't even understand what we're doing. So we have echoes and we keep them. It's not a clear rite of passage. And as we don't have any of these rituals anymore, when we are young people, our cultural development helps us in a slower process all the way through the developmental stages. It happens later in life. So there's certain shifts of both awareness, awakening, and initiation, embodiment, every stage. So instead of doing it once when we are young, we're doing it very slowly. And that doesn't mean that ancient cultures haven't had ritual development after the initiation rites of youth. But a lot of that was happening then. And as it has been guided beautifully, they had a lot of more trust in let's say, difficult, challenging life phases because they learned how to structure them. They have been structured and guided in them, so they understand how to structure and guide themselves and others. So the whole developmental arch has been much more fostered instead of us just dropping into chaos here and there. And as I said, the fun part, now we're coming into what are we actually doing here in our culture without these rites of passage. Feminine and masculine initiation needs to be done both by each individual for an integrated personality. So if you have a feminine equipment, you will do both the feminine and the masculine initiation rites in due course of your life, and the other way around, of course. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to put in a nutshell my research that I've done so far about feminine and masculine initiation, and without sugarcoating it much. You know that I don't like sugarcoating. I like naming things as they are. And that doesn't mean they have to be hard, but I like the clarity of it. And we are looking at this today from the lens of integrating polarity, because this is what we do. We have the feminine, we have the masculine, we have both faculties within us, and these two are at war with each other throughout our development until we integrate them. And that sounds harsh, and it kind of is, because if you look at culture, we're all aware that we have a very masculine imprinted culture, and the feminine is kind of trying to, I'm saying it as we feel it and as we live it, trying to fight its way back into society. And I think it would be much better if we were trying to love a way back into society, but that demands a certain maturity. And for the sake of reconciling feminine and masculine, I'm going to now place feminine and masculine initiation side by side, point by point, so we can have a little bit of a comparison what it actually means, so we can apply it to all of our inner structure, all of our parts, all of our faculties, and also, of course, in the mirror of romantic relationships, where this plays out most strongly, and cultural development, where we can see these forces at work in every time we step out of, every time we open our eyes, basically, and we interact with somebody else. what we do first is we look at the belief behind that is actually being defended and doesn't want to be initiated. The masculine belief is I'm committed and conscious. I just need space, time, freedom, or the right woman. So this is basically avoidance disguised as autonomy. And the feminine counterpart thereof is I am loving, devoted. I'm giving everything. I just need him to step up, choose me, or grow. So that's basically attachment disguised as death. And that's the true polarities when it comes to initiation. And when we look at this, in romance, it's very clear. I don't think I have to add anything to that. But in culture, what does culture currently do? Everybody says, I'm conscious, but I still need my space and my freedom, and I demand this. And the feminine says, I love, but without you, I can't do it. I need a mirror. If there's no mirror, I'm falling into nothingness. The longing to be seen as the feminine core wound. And what must end here is for the masculine, the end of fragmentation, and for the feminine, the end of self-abandonment. What does the end of fragmentation mean for the masculine? That's very on point here. Fantasy leakage. What does that mean? If you want to find one particular symptom for fantasy leakage, it would be porn. As in you fantasize yourself into something very like sensual, and you kind of leak out into that. It's constant scanning for alternatives, regulation via novelty, always having the back door open, and also divided sexual attention. This is basically eros leaking, and then presence is unstable. Initiation in the masculine means to end optionality. You commit, not because you have to, but because you understand, otherwise you're leaking your energy. And that means you commit to one purpose, you commit to one woman, you commit to, one thing in general. The feminine, on the other hand, needs to end emotional self-abandonment. So that means adapting to stay loved, pleasing. The whole pleasing culture is that. It's a feminine faculty who is kind of bending to be loved. The waiting and ambiguity, overgiving. Waiting is one of my favorite things, like the pining. I want to call it pining. Then escalating to secure, making drama, basically emotional blackmail in that sense, and performing desirability. That plays into the whole porn thing again. So worth depends on being chosen, and that means sovereignty is unstable. And initiation in the feminine means the end of bargaining. When we're activated into that whole thing, in the sense of and activated into our shadow. The masculine behavior, trackable behavior, when activated, withdraws, needs space, intellectualizes. I call it abstraction, and you know how to trigger the hell out of me if you do that. And regulate alone. That's masculine uninitiated behavior. The initiation would require fear without exit, staying present while activated and triggered, and not leaving the field. Masculine initiation means staying. The feminine, on the other hand, when attachment rises, she tends to over-open, over-attune, adapt, and escalate intimacy, which means giving herself into a container that's not secure. It's basically overgiving physical and emotional intimacy without receiving structure on the other side. We call it safety. And big debate out there, as we all know. So the feminine initiation is to stand up for her own self, to stand straight, to have a backbone, a spine, to say stop, to call boundaries. And it doesn't come from trauma and narcissism and let's say egocentric behavior. It comes from fully understanding that she's worthy of it. The real test for the masculine is, or the real test, let's call it the trackable behavior to see if this is actually happening. Do habits change? So the masculine within all of us needs to change his habits the moment initiation happens. So if you usually tend to not commit, how does not commitment, I don't know how to say this properly, how does not committing look like, for example, in a feminine? Well, not committing to your workout, not committing to your purpose, not committing to taking your supplements, whatever. It's like the lack of focus and the flowing out and the constant postponing. What's the beautiful word that we all use so often? Procrastination. Later. If people send me messages, this is so beautiful, I'll send you a message later. I'm always like, yep, later. I like the process communication, but how long is later? Is later within the day or 3 weeks later? That's procrastination. That's not being present with what is. And then addictions end. Whatever kind of addiction you have, and an addiction can be scrolling. An addiction can be, I don't know, having, I'm not going to go into addictions. You know what it means. It's a habit you can't get rid of. And alternatives close, which means you're stepping out of leaking. So commitment kills other futures. And that's the thing. If nothing dies here, nothing was chosen. And that sounds a bit harsh. It doesn't mean that your relationship with another person has to die. It just has to change form. And it has to be clear nothing else is happening anymore on this end particular. We're changing our form. So we're shifting from one mode into the next. And we're not falling back into the old mode. That's masculine commitment. You're accountable with yourself. Consistency and accountability is what make that. And the feminine commitment, the trackable behavior that's happening is access is withdrawn when it's not met. That doesn't mean to end the relationship either, but it means not like this with other things. For example, not romantically, but with purpose, or not in this project, but in something else that's not so dear to my heart, where we don't trigger each other. Hope ends when behavior contradicts. So the feminine usually constantly hopes, as in it's going to be fine, I just have to love more. And then it's going to be okay. And eventually the opposite, whatever it is, will commit. No, loving more is not going to do that. Loving more while boundaries are rising, that's going to do that. Which means I love myself more. I don't have to withdraw from the other person as a human being, but I have boundaries. And if you don't treat me like that, I'm going to withdraw. If you don't answer my messages, you'll get less. Very simple. And it's not that I'm going to send more. Or I'm going to send my messages and I don't care if you answer, because I'm doing it for me. I'm not waiting for the mirror. The next thing is fantasy futures are grieved. This is what happens when you had a hope and it dies. You're properly grieving that. You're not evading. You're not just taking, I don't know, the next boyfriend or the next project, or you're sitting there and you understand, or the next girlfriend for the masculine. You don't switch from one to the next, but you're sitting with it and letting its lesson and its gifts enrich you and make you become wider, more integrated. And the availability stops without hostility is basically what sums it all up. You change form. You don't make the other person. The feminine initiation understands that she's not the victim here. This is her choice. There's no judgment in that. There's no hard feelings, no bad blood, all these kind of things. But if nothing collapses, nothing was surrendered. So if you don't let go of what kind of triggered your boundaries and you've overgiven, you've overstepped them, if that doesn't go away and kind of implode somehow, you didn't initiate. And what that does is it ends external regulation. And I think that's the most important thing. And that's my biggest learning. The masculine does no longer look for sexual validation, admiration, and feminine approval. They're happy with themselves. They don't need somebody to warm their bed or alchemize their emotions with them. They can do it themselves. And the feminine doesn't no longer depend on being wanted, chosen, and be seen as special and have somebody warm their bed. She belongs to herself first. He belongs to himself first. The mask, what it gets us, there's something very valid and essential in solitude, because it teaches us how to regulate alone. And that's initiation. Regulating by yourself, not needing it from somebody else. It doesn't mean that we don't get it and we don't give it, but it's a difference between needing it and enjoying it. But there is no need, and if it doesn't happen, I am not crumbling. This beautiful line, the goal is creating a life that doesn't collapse when somebody leaves. You land in yourself and not in the bottomless pit again. So the masculine solitude teaches the masculine to regulate without women, without sex, without admiration, and without emotional soothing. And solitude reveals everything that the masculine avoids: fear, emptiness, inadequacy. And usually men compensate either by going on random dates and doing feminine practices like dancing, or having lots of girlfriends, having lots of depth conversations, having practices where there's a lot of touch. That's all regulation from the outside. That's not solitude. You can be single and still totally co-regulate all the time. And for the feminine, that's learning to exist without being chosen, without romantic intensity, without attachment reassurance, and without relational reflection. And that reveals what she avoids. That's loneliness, unworthiness, abandonment fear. And the initiation for the masculine begins when no one is left to regulate him but himself. And for the feminine, she no longer needs to be chosen to feel real. And now we're going into the most common bypasses in the end. For masculine, it's conscious non-monogamy. The whole polyamory thing fosters that. Serial novelty. Work as a replacement displacement. Easier partners. Insight without lifestyle change. So more and more awareness, but nothing really changes in behavior. That feels like growth, but it delays the destabilization necessary for integration. And the feminine bypasses are serial monogamy, love bombing, high vibe spirituality, staying friends with unfinished lovers, and calling waiting patience. It feels empowered and it delays self-containment. The masculine initiation in one line is fear without exit, and the feminine initiation is longing without self-betrayal. And initiation breaks that loop. So it forces each of the polarities to metabolize their own wounds and hold the activation, if there is any, the trigger, and stop outsourcing safety. So without initiation, polarity is compulsion, and with initiation, polarity is choice. And the initiation refines power from reactive to conscious, and that changes everything. And it creates the possibility of love without fear-driven negotiation and intimacy without control strategies. It gives us a lot of creative energy. Eros is finally being freed into its highest form.